All right, so welcome back. We are going to prep our bed and get our PEI sheet on. Again, as I had noted earlier, Modix recommends to put this on in their instructions. They recommend to put it on a little earlier in the process. I do use it as a platform for tools as I'm building. So that's the reason why I've delayed it a slight bit to once I actually have the bed installed in the machine, but before I put the enclosure on. So note with the bed, before we go any further with it, these 4 bolts that hold this bed down in place, you'll notice they are actually making a noise. I don't have them tight. Partially the reason why that is, the holes that these actually mount into are conical. This bed is going to go through a fair bit of expansion and contraction as it heats and cools. So when you actually tighten this bed down, I've got it centered in position as to where it's going to be. Once I have contact to the bolt to where it's going to come down, I can feel it where it starts to tighten up a little bit. I'm just going to turn it another maybe quarter turn, a little less than a quarter turn. You do not want these bolts tight. The reason why is because as this expands and contracts, it needs to be able to move a little bit on these bolts. This is normal when you're dealing with a large format printer. So you just want these to basically grab the bed so that if you were to turn the machine on its side, the bed's not going to fall off. But anything other than that, it's not tightened securely down to the frame rails. So I already have our plastic protective, our shipping plastic removed from this bed. You can see the flywheel marks where they've machined it so that it's as flat a surface as you can get. I'm using isopropyl alcohol and a microfiber rag. You want to make sure that this bed is as clean as you can get it. As you're cleaning it, you're going to notice there's a few little blemish marks and things like that on it, just for people handling it in the plant when they made it. You want to try and get all of that off as much as you can. All the old residue from the tape or the plastic that was on it, you want to make sure all that comes off. The cleaner you can get this bed, the flatter your PEI sheet is going to be. Now, as I had mentioned earlier, we are going to end up putting a flexible bed system on this. But for the sake of this video and helping people in getting this PEI sheet on properly, because it is a little bit of a trick to do it, I am going to install the PEI sheet on this bed. Now, once you have this bed cleaned with ISO, try not to touch it with your hands because you will leave a little bit of grease from your skin on the bed, and that's not what we want at this point. So leave it for a minute, let the ISO just kind of evaporate off completely. Once you're ready to install, you're going to take your PEI sheet, leave the backing on it. You're going to lay it on your bed, backing side down. Now, these PEI sheets may or not be exact for the bed. This one here is a little large on the front, and I'm going to make it a little large on the left, on your left, on the left side. I'm going to place it so it's perfectly square against this edge and perfectly square against the back. Now, once we get this laid in place so that we know that's where it's going to live, grab a little bit of painter's tape, masking tape if you have it. Try and stay away from things like duct tape and things like that. You want something that's going to be relatively easily removable. So once you get your back edge, I put a couple of pieces of tape on the back. I just stick it to the PEI sheet right now. So I'm going to even it up on this edge, the one closest to me. I'm going to even it up on the back edge so it's not overhanging. And then I'm going to tape this PEI sheet to the plate and to the extrusion in the back. Now what this is basically doing is positioning this PEI sheet for you so you know it's not going to move. So when I take this PEI sheet and lift it, when I lay it back down, it's going to end up in the exact same position again. Should be enough on that point. So I have what they call a squeegee. This is usually used for vinyl installs when you're doing vehicle decaling. If you have an old credit card, relatively stiff piece of plastic, this has a little bit of flex to it. You'll notice my edge on it is not perfectly flat. I actually have a little bit of a bowl in this one. It does tend to work a little easier to try and put these sheets on. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel this sheet up. I'm going to start peeling the backing off the back. And as I'm peeling the backing off, I'm going to use my squeegee and I'm going to rub all the bubbles out as I'm peeling the backing off the sheet. So I'm only going to do it an inch at a time. There are different methods and different processes of doing this. I'm used to working by myself, so this is the process that works the easiest for me. So once you take this PEI sheet, you can pull it up out of the way, start a corner, pulling your backing off. And the PEI is relatively stiff, so it shouldn't be that difficult to get the backing started. So what I do is I start it and then just simply fold it under so that I don't lose my corner. Once you pull this sheet up, you can now grab your corner. And I'm going to strip the backing just off the back portion of the bed. The one closest to where the tape is. I'm going to pull it even across the bed, about an inch. So when it's laid down like this, what I have folded under is actually holding the PEI sheet off the bed. At this point, I'm going to use my squeegee and I'm just going to gently start to push that PEI sheet down onto the bed. Just going to start with the last edge. Now, I have a good solid start on the first inch of this sheet. I'm just going to visually look at it again real quick, make sure my back edge is still square, and if I look down here, once this goes on, it should follow down this edge, assuming this PEI sheet is square. For the most part, they are. So I'm going to reach under, I'm going to take another inch of that PEI sheet, of the backing sheet. I'm going to start on one edge, push it that way, and then I'm going to pull it towards me. If you get an air bubble in it, push the air bubble towards the closest edge, and you should be able to push the air bubble out. What you want to try and do when you're getting this on is get little to no air bubble in here at all. So once you start moving a little bit, peel your sheet an inch. I come in the middle, push to one side, and then push to the opposite side. So I've just moved around here a little bit so you can see exactly what I'm doing. Again, I'm going to pull my backing about an inch, come down the center, pull one half towards me. You can actually hear the air bubbles moving out as I'm squeegeeing this out. And then push the other side. Pull this down, split the middle, pull it towards me, and then push it towards you. And this is what you want to end up with. I've got a small bubble here in this one. This one may come out. Okay. It's one of the main reasons why when you deal with when you have a squeegee, you don't want a sharp edge on it, because sometimes you have to apply a fair bit of force to it. You don't want it to accidentally hook an edge and scrape your PEI sheet. So I have a couple of small bubbles in here. Again, you want to try and get these bubbles out as you're putting it on, but once in a while you'll get a sneaky one in there. This is a little bit of a trick that you can get it out with just having the tiniest little mark on your PEI sheet. Aesthetically, you may see where the bubble was, but just run your finger over it and make sure that it feels flat. As long as you don't feel any bumps or anything in it, you're okay. So at this point, we can peel our masking tape off, because obviously our PEI sheet is not going to go anywhere at this point. You'll notice now on this that you have a PEI sheet is mounted. You have a little bit of overhang here and a little bit of overhang here. I just grab a sharp utility knife. I'm going to use the corner of the bed as a guide for my knife, and I'm just going to cut into the edge of it. Hold the knife on approximately 45 degrees while you just run it right down the edge of the steel plate. Just like that. You're just going to trim off the excess, and now you're left with no edge at all. Same thing on this side here from a slightly different angle. I'm going to do a small cut in the corner. Take my knife, hold it at a 45-degree angle, and use the edge of the bed as a guide for my blade. Make sure you leave a little bit of your knife down here because you don't want to slip over top and cut your PEI. Okay, so that is your PEI sheet installed and trimmed. Now, one additional step that I do, you will notice that these bolts are slightly higher than the surface of the PEI sheet itself. What I do in those cases is I just cut a 45-degree angle across the edge of the bolt. And it just looks a little cleaner. Rather than having the bubble in the corner where the bolt is, I just cut the corner, and then you won't have any bubbles under your PEI at all. So that is the installation of your PEI sheet done. Now, anytime you're going to print on your PEI, always give it a wipe with a little bit of ISO. You don't want anything, any of the grease from your hands or anything else or dust on it before you start printing. You want to make sure that this sheet is clean. So now we're going to start working on the panels. The panels on these machines come in two sections. So there's an upper section, there's a lower section, and then there's kind of a decorative strip that goes through the middle. You'll see it as I start working on these machines. I'm actually going to start on the back first, and then I'm going to work my way around. The lid I handle as a separate install. I build the frame and put the panels on it at the same time. So we're going to worry about getting the enclosure into this machine, get everything all sealed up, and then we'll work on the top for working on the lid. Okay, so onto the panels here. The first thing we have to do is we just have to loosen the bolts that hold our control box in place. So once I have all these bolts loose, my mounting or control box is almost clear of the frame. But obviously I don't want to lose all my electronics on the floor. So with this, I've already peeled off the back. We're going to peel off all these pieces here as we go. Now, once we have this in place, we're going to lay this up on the back. I skipped a step here. I already have my T-nuts dropped in place inside the frame. The ones in the very bottom, I have them drop a little low because I can get them up in place. The ones in the high, I've got them fairly close. So we'll get those in place in a second. But once we get this up, we're going to take our panel and we're going to push it. So let's slide our panel in. The two cutouts in the panel are for you to be able to manage the wiring that travels from inside the machine to outside. So just make sure you're not nicking or catching any of that. As you slide the panel over. So just to make it a little easier on yourself, once you get the panel on so far, slide one of these T-nuts in, grab one of your M5 by 12 millimeter bolts, and just hold it in there. Don't even tighten it down, just put it in so it's going to hold it in place. I'm going to grab a second one. I'm going to line up this T-nut behind the hole, and I'm just going to put a second screw in here. So this is going to free up our hands to be able to deal with our control box. So this bolt down here in the control box, let's just pull that one right out. And at this point, there's only one bolt left holding it in. So I'm going to grab my long Allen key. Now this panel will stay because you have two bolts up here. So keep your hands on the control box, because when you let this go, this is basically going to be sitting free. So move your control box out of the way, slide your panel over again, watching your wires. You don't want to nick or pull anything. Once you get the T-nuts for the box inside the slot here, you can put the two top ones back in. They are long enough to hold with the enclosure in place, but don't tighten them down all the way, because if you tighten them down, you won't be able to do the little small adjustments on the panel that you will need to do. So now we're going to push our panel, finish pushing it all the way home. Always being very careful of your wiring. Now what you're looking for, if you feel the width of this panel, what you want is the width of the panel left outside the extrusion, because the next panel is going to get bolted on and is going to butt up into this panel here. So you just want it even on both sides. At the top, I keep it flush. So once you have it in final position, you can just cinch down those top two bolts. So now, you'll see these couple of T-nuts that I've got in here are close. Just use your Allen key, get in behind, give the T-nut a little push so that you can get it up where you need it to be. Let's finish getting our control box mounted in. Sometimes the T-nuts move a little bit, or like that one, drop completely out of the way. If your T-nut drops, just take the 2 bolts out of the control box. It does have a fairly wide slot behind it, so it should be easy enough to find. Shove your bolts out, tip it forward. You can locate your T-nut. It's just down here. I'm actually going to rotate it over so that it locks back in the channel again. And then I can push it back up roughly where I want it to be. Now we're going to move on to the next one, which is here. This one we need to push up underneath, and again, 12 millimeter. Okay. Now that all that's done, next panel is going to be this one. This is basically a decorator panel, which is going to go in between the 2 panels, upper and lower. So now one thing to note with this, the back red strip is different than the ones on the sides. The ones on the sides are identical. The other thing is these strips have a rounded corner on them. So if you don't feel the rounded corner is going to go on the outside, sweeping around the edge of the machine. So in the kit, they give you 4 M5 by 15 millimeter low profile screws. That is for the outside portions of this. Now, I put these bolts in. I don't tighten them up because I still have to slide the next panel up underneath this and be able to bolt it on. What I do, however, is to grab my 2 more 5 mil by 12 mil bolts, and this time, instead of screwing it into a T-nut, you're just going to screw it into a regular nut on the inside. Okay. So our back upper and our mid panel is in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to the right side. And I'm going to let you have a look at this one. I'm going to do this one more time. And we're just going to work our way around the machine. All right, quick note when you're doing these panels. There's 3 of these panels that have vent holes in them. And they're basically for air filters. If you're not going to be using the air filter, you have to use the square blocks that they've provided, and you have to install them over these holes. So I'm going to assume this is going to be the exterior side of the panel, in which case I can just drop the 4 bolts through it, put the panel on, put the cover on from the back. These are using the 12 millimeter bolts again. Once we have it on, so it just makes it a little easier if you do these on first before you install the panels onto the machine. If not, you're going to need a friend or some really long arms to be able to reach the nuts on the inside. All right, so I've got the panels on the rest of the machine. This top one is just a little different. So with this top trim piece, this is basically just going to sit over top of all of the extrusions. And it's more so you don't drop things in the slots than anything else. So you just have to be careful with this one. On the very front, there's just 3 holes. And the 3 holes take these conical screws. You don't install them in any other place, but you do install them the same way. So you have to put the sliding T-slot nut in the channel, and then put one under each one of the holes in the front. And then once you get it in there, just drop them in the same you do as any other screw. Just put them in loosely to begin with. Get it centered up. And then once we're done with that, you can center it up. And once it's centered, just tighten down the front 3 first. Once those are done, then continue with the rest. All right, so we're gonna start on the top lid next. All you need for this is your bag with top lid, has all your bits and pieces in it that you're gonna require. Along with that, you need 8 pieces of extrusion. There are, I'll give you a rundown of what they are. You need 4 at 300 millimeters, which are the short ones here. You need 2 660 millimeters, and you need 2 675 millimeters. So there's not much of a difference in them, about 15 mil, but you'll notice it. That's why you always need to have your measuring tape close on hand. So the other part of this process is this top lid uses a lot of these internal 90-degree brackets. So I'm going to run you through the process of putting one of these together and note a couple of differences in them, just so that you're aware of it before you get too far into the process. So I'm just going to grab, these are packaged separately. The grub screws and the corner brackets are packaged separately. When you go put these together, you grab one of your grub screws, and I believe it's a 2 millimeter Allen key. And on each one of these corner brackets, you have to screw in the grub screw into the corner bracket. Now, I don't screw it in very far, almost to the other side, but not quite, because you are going to have to screw or slide these fairly freely into and out of the extrusion. So once you get both of these grub screws in, I'm going to point out to you a very important difference in these corner brackets. If you look at these corner brackets, there is a side edge. And you'll notice on one edge, the one towards me, is longer than the edge that's on the side that's a little further away from me. If I turn it in this direction, you may be able to see it actually is left with a notch here on both sides. Now what that notch is for is when you slide this into the extrusion, you're going to be able to slide this and position it anywhere in this extrusion. Once you position it where you want it to be, you tighten one of the Allen keys down, or one of the grub screws down, and then it's not going to move. Now, if you insert this on the wrong side, so if you take this out and insert it this way, it's not going to go past that long lip that's on the side of the 90-degree bracket. What that's meant for is if you have a second piece of extrusion, you can slide it on here and it will go past, so that now you can position this piece anywhere along this one that you want. When you're inserting these 90-degree brackets, be very careful of the orientation of the corners based on where the extrusion is going to be. So I'm going to try and point it out as I go along, but just make a mental note as you're assembling them. You have to be careful of which orientation these corner brackets are in. So I am just going to prep all of these corner brackets just so you're not waiting in between. And we will be back in a moment and we will continue assembling. All right, so I've got all the corner brackets put together. We're going to start this with one of the lengths of aluminum at 675. So with our 675 millimeter piece, I'm going to put a plastic cap on one end. Grab a short piece of extrusion, put our L bracket in here so that it doesn't slide into the extrusion. We're actually going to slide it into the long piece from the back. So with that plastic cap on, that's going to set the position of where this piece of extrusion is going to sit. So I'm going to tighten down that screw slightly. There you go. So once this is done, our plastic cap and our lower piece of extrusion are going to be straight and square. On the back end, we're just simply going to add one of these 330s as another leg. Now, on the back of this piece, all you're going to do is line this up with the back of the extrusion. There's no plastic cap on this side. It's actually going to be on the back of the machine, so you're not going to see it. There's one done. I have to do one more just like it. Okay. Our two sides are done. Now we're going to start moving on with our cross bracing. So one of the middle pieces that goes across these two are 660 mil. It should be these pieces. We're just going to double check our length. And this piece is here. We actually need to add 4 of these corner pieces. So we're going to put our long pieces that will prevent it from sliding in towards the outside. To here. And then we're going to run this down the middle of this extrusion. Now, because this is a middle support piece, I'm just going to temporarily tack it into place right now. We'll finalize its location once we start putting on our panels. So I'm not tightening these down a lot, just putting them in so they touch. Now, to very quickly make sure that all this is squared up, I'm going to tighten these two in here so they're relatively square, or they're just touching here on the inside. I'm just going to push the bracket against the edge of the table. That will keep it square straight across, and then we can just snug in these two. Again, at this point, it doesn't have to be perfect. We just have to be close. We're going to put our front bracket in. So our front bracket here is, again, another 660. And 2 more of our 90-degree corner pieces. These are going to come into the back. At this point in time, I'm going to move ahead. We're going to install these 4 red brackets here. Need to be installed on the top of the Modix, where the trim piece went around the top. We're going to install these 4 brackets on, and then we're going to move this over on top of the Modix, and then we're going to start finishing our enclosure on the top.